Hi everybody, it's Christina Wallace, and I'm going to review blood vessels with you today. Let's start with some blood vessel histology. There are 3 layers to a blood vessel. The tunica intima is the simple squamous epithelium that lines the lumen. The tunica media is the smooth muscle layer. And the tunica externa is the connective tissue wrapping. So you can see the varied thickness of the tunica externa compared to the tunica media. The vasa vasorum is the blood supply for these big arteries and veins, and you would find them between tunica externa and tunica media, small blood vessels. How to tell an artery from a vein? First, look at the shape of the lumen. Round or oval lumens with a regular appearance are generally arteries. Lumens that are flat or stellate shaped or oddly shaped generally can be veins. You can also look at the thickness of the tunica media compared to the tunica externa. So if you see a really thick muscle layer with a comparatively thinner tunica externa, that generally can indicate an artery. Whereas if you have lots more tunica externa than you have tunica media, that might more generally indicate a vein. You can also look for the presence of an internal elastic membrane. That's this curly phone cord looking structure. That is an arterial feature designed to help the artery deal with high pressure. Now let's take a look at locations of vessels. Off of the candy cane curve of the aorta, we see the brachiocephalic trunk goes to the right. So here we have the brachiocephalic trunk. Branching off of the brachiocephalic trunk are the right common carotid and the right subclavian. So we have right subclavian here, right common carotid. Going to the left from the aorta is the left common carotid coming directly off the aorta and the left subclavian. Going down the arm, branching off of or continuation of the subclavian, we see the axillary artery in the armpit area. That will become the brachial artery of the upper arm, which splits into the radial artery on the lateral or thumb side of the forearm, and the medial side is the ulnar artery on the pinky side. The major arteries of the heart are the pulmonary trunk, which is the exit vessel from the right ventricle, and the pulmonary arteries going to the lungs. So here's the pulmonary arteries, one going to each lung. Here's a pulmonary artery. Moving on to the arteries of the abdominal cavity. First we have the celiac trunk, which will branch into 3 arteries. The left gastric goes to the left and feeds the stomach. The splenic also goes to the left and feeds the spleen. And to the right, the celiac trunk branches into the common hepatic artery. The common hepatic artery will go to more than one destination. The common hepatic artery branches into the gastroduodenal artery, which feeds the stomach and hooks up with the left gastric, and the duodenum, which is right here. It also then branches into the hepatic artery proper, which goes directly into the liver. The hepatic artery proper, once it enters the liver, becomes the right hepatic artery feeding the right lobe of the liver, and the left hepatic artery feeding the left lobe of the liver. Inferior to the celiac trunk and all of its tributaries, we will see the suprarenal arteries that feed the adrenal glands, the superior mesenteric artery, which feeds the right side of the colon and small intestine, so it kind of goes behind the pancreas right there. The superior mesenteric artery will feed into the middle colic artery, which is this little stub just right there, and that would feed the transverse colon that is cut out of the picture right here. The next one down is the right colic artery, which feeds the right side of the colon, and most inferior, the ileocolic arteries, which feed the ileum and the colon. The ileum is the most distal region of the small intestine that empties food into the colon. Inferior to the superior mesenteric and suprarenal arteries, we have the renal arteries, which are feeding the kidneys, the gonadal arteries that feed the testes and ovaries and look like the cat whiskers, and the inferior mesenteric artery that feeds the left side of the colon. Branching off of the inferior mesenteric artery is the left colic artery, which would feed the left side of the colon, and the sigmoidal artery, which feeds the sigmoid colon, which is the lower left quadrant of the large intestine. Arteries of the pelvis and leg. We start with the common iliac artery, which is where the aorta branches into a Y. These have multiple destinations, common iliac artery. The internal iliac arteries would branch into the pelvis and feed our bladder and internal pelvic organs. The external iliac artery will continue on its way out to the leg. The external iliac artery then becomes the femoral artery, which stays close to the bone, and then around the region of the knee, it dives posteriorly and becomes the popliteal artery. Once the popliteal artery reaches the calf, the first lateral branch is the anterior tibial artery, going between fibula and tibia to the front of the calf and down to the dorsum of the foot. And the posterior tibial artery continues down the posterior surface of the calf. Now let's move on to the veins. Remember, veins go towards the heart. So the first thing we need to find are the pulmonary veins. These are returning from the lungs to the left atrium, bringing oxygenated blood to the left atrium. The superior vena cava is the returning blood from the head and arms into the right atrium. So we have the superior vena cava here and here. The inferior vena cava is the returning blood from my abdomen and lower body. So this is the inferior vena cava. And I can see an inferior vena cava here and here. Let's look at the veins of the thoracic cavity and the arm. We'll start with the superior vena cava, located right here, draining directly into the right atrium. Then we have the brachiocephalic veins, symmetrical veins that drain into the superior vena cava. And the subclavian veins that drain the arms into the brachiocephalic veins. So draining my brain and face are the internal jugular veins, the larger, more medial vein of the neck, and the external jugular, which are more lateral and much smaller. The veins behind the heart and lungs are the azygos vein, which sits right on the spine and drains directly into the superior vena cava. The hemiazygos vein is on the lower left, and the accessory hemiazygos vein is on the upper left. The inferior vena cava drains the legs and abdominal organs and empties directly into the right atrium. Now let's look at the veins of the arm. I want to start with the superficial, close to the surface veins of the arm. The cephalic vein is the lateral superficial vein of the arm. The basilic vein is the medial superficial vein of the arm. I think of it as being close to the body, on the body side. And the median cubital vein crosses over the inner fold of your elbow. Now let's look at the deeper, or the deep veins of the arm, which follow the pattern or similar to the arteries. The first we see is the axillary vein in the armpit region, and that becomes the brachial vein close to the bone, close to the humerus. That brachial vein is also going to continue down where the radial vein on the lateral thumb side and the ulnar vein will drain into it. These are not currently on your list. Let's move on to the veins of the abdominal organs. You have two veins that are associated with the liver or the hepatic organ. The first is the hepatic veins, and these drain the liver into the inferior vena cava. These are the exit of all blood from the liver. And the second vein that is associated with the liver is the hepatic portal vein. And what that does is it drains all of the blood from your intestines into the liver to be filtered before it goes back to the heart to be sent out to the body. So this is the hepatic portal vein. It goes behind the duodenum right there. There are three main veins that drain into the hepatic portal vein. The first is the superior mesenteric vein. And so this is going to drain the right side of the colon and intestines, and it dives behind the pancreas right here. The second is the splenic vein that drains the liver. And the third is the inferior mesenteric vein, but it doesn't go directly. It goes into the splenic vein first. This is the inferior mesenteric vein, and it dives behind the pancreas right there. Draining into the inferior mesenteric vein are the left colic veins that drain the left side of my colon, and the sigmoidal veins that drain my sigmoid colon. So inferior to all of the mesenteric veins, draining into the inferior vena cava, directly or indirectly, there is some asymmetry here. The first we will see are the renal veins, or the suprarenal veins, pardon me, draining the adrenal glands, and these are asymmetrical. So my right one goes directly into IVC, my left one goes into the left renal vein. So here is the left renal vein and the right renal vein. And then the gonadal veins are also asymmetrical. So my left gonadal vein goes into my left renal vein, but my right gonadal vein goes into the inferior vena cava. Draining the legs and the pelvic cavity into the inferior vena cava are the common iliac veins. As you can see up here, a little bit of the common iliac vein there. The internal iliac veins drain my bladder and reproductive organs into the common iliac, and the external iliac is draining my legs into the common iliac. And finally, draining my legs are the femoral veins that are packaged along with and traverse the same path as the femoral arteries close to the femur, and the great saphenous vein, which is much more superficial and medial and the longest vein in the body and goes all the way from ankle to groin. Let's review the coronary circulation. So the right and left coronary arteries come directly off of the aorta and go kind of under the auricles. The circumflex artery will circle around to the posterior aspect of the heart. And the anterior interventricular artery branches from the left coronary artery down the anterior interventricular sulcus. The posterior interventricular artery is on the posterior aspect in the posterior interventricular sulcus. So this is your posterior interventricular artery. The coronary veins are next. So the great cardiac vein is on the anterior in the anterior interventricular sulcus. The middle cardiac vein is in the posterior interventricular sulcus. And the coronary sinus is where all of the veins drain into from the coronary circulation. Right here, the coronary sinus, and it would drain directly into the right atrium. And that takes care of all the vessels on your list. Thanks.